Our world is mostly governed by capitalist economic systems that involve trading goods and services. If John owns a water pump and Sam has a fruit tree, they can work together to provide water and fruit for both their families. The same is true of healthcare. Since each effort that we make has a value in the market, we sell these efforts in the form of services or goods and use that money to support our families. Healthcare, like anything else, needs to be paid for. Many different systems across the world are used to pay for healthcare. Countries like Canada and the United Kingdom have fully nationalized healthcare, otherwise known as single-payer healthcare, where it is free at the point of use and paid for through taxes. Countries like France and Australia have mixed public-private systems, where most basic healthcare is paid for through taxes, but additional healthcare is available in the private market and is used by large numbers of people. Other nations, such as the United States, have an almost entirely private system, with certain public systems for select groups. In the U.S., the elderly can access Medicare, while the poor can use Medicaid, both of which are public systems. Such countries can limit cost through a process called managed care, in which insurance companies only pay for services recommended by a doctor, and where only certain approved doctors and hospitals are allowed. The goal of managed care is to reduce healthcare costs and includes things like providing incentives for patients and doctors to use cheaper treatments, reviews of which treatments are medically necessary, and limiting inpatient treatment and lengths of stay. Capitalism works well in a lot of ways. However, resources are not evenly distributed. What happens if someone can't afford to pay for something? Under capitalism, they simply go without. For many goods and services, this is not a major problem. But what about things that are life and death? In such cases, people can be left without what they need to survive to be healthy. This is where people start asking the question, is healthcare a right? Most people believe that humans have basic rights. For example, you might argue that you have the right to free speech, and you might argue that you have the right to life itself. Many would argue that to provide these rights, we need to help each other, even if someone doesn't have the ability to pay. If human beings have a right to life, then letting someone die of dehydration would be wrong. Water is a right, and the failure to provide it is wrong. This is the basic argument for how healthcare can be a right. A doctor with the ability to save someone's life is considered to be doing something morally wrong if he or she fails to act. It is difficult to argue that healthcare is not a right if you believe this. Some have pointed out that while many Americans claim that healthcare isn't a right, few would argue that people should be turned away from the emergency room. If people think emergency rooms should treat even those who cannot pay, that implies that they really believe healthcare is a right, even if they claim otherwise. The counter-argument to viewing healthcare as a right is that it is essentially a claim to other people's money. Healthcare requires spending time and resources to diagnose and treat people. Drugs, in particular, can be incredibly expensive. If healthcare is a right, that means you have a right to money that is currently held by other people, and you can mandate others to take action. Some argue that something which requires other people's money or action can never truly be a right. In this view, only free things, such as free speech or freedom of assembly, count as fundamental human rights. A more basic way of saying this is that a right cannot require someone to act. You can't stop someone from speaking, but you are also not required to rescue them when they are drowning. This view of humanity is only one of many. An alternative view holds that something is a right when the opposite would be wrong. Many people believe that inaction can be just as wrong as action. Indeed, we have legal principles concerning negligence, which seem to corroborate this. Likewise, religions have stories like the Good Samaritan, which suggest that action to help others is required. Many of those who do not believe healthcare is a right also believe that human beings have a right to life, a principle found in the U.S. Constitution. If, for example, a person is against abortion, it follows that they believe that life has fundamental moral value. This would imply that healthcare may also be a right, since healthcare protects that right to life. Some medical procedures are exorbitantly expensive. No matter the system, private or public, certain treatments are not yet cost-effective. Resources are not unlimited, so providing every possible treatment to everyone in need may be impractical or impossible. Yet if healthcare is a right, that suggests that this must be done. Having something as a right cannot make sense if the resources are not available to make it so. This argument is a strong one. However, some claim that only basic healthcare is a human right, while others hold that Western nations have sufficient resources to provide all necessary healthcare. Others still point out that healthcare is far more expensive overall under the private system used in the US than it is in a public system like Canada's, and that high price is artificial. Whether or not healthcare is a right is largely a matter of opinion. However, healthcare as a right is the dominant view worldwide. This is reflected in the European Court of Human Rights, agreed upon by the vast majority of people in the Western world, and is even implied by what American citizens expect of doctors and emergency rooms. Healthcare, like anything, needs to be paid for. It can be paid for through taxes, through private payment systems, or a combination of both. Public systems tend to be favored by those who believe healthcare is a right, while private systems are preferred by those who do not. People who argue that healthcare is a right hold that failing to help someone who is sick is morally wrong. They also claim that attitudes towards the behavior of doctors and the expectation that emergency rooms should not turn people away suggests that some level of healthcare is considered a right by most people. Finally, they point out that believing people have a right to life contradicts the belief that healthcare is not a right. Those who believe healthcare is not a right claim that someone that requires other people to act or spend money cannot truly be a right. They also argue that resources are limited, making the belief in healthcare as a right impractical. Nevertheless, the majority of those in the developed world, including both the public and their governments alike, would state definitively that healthcare is a right. Where this view is not dominant, many people still hold beliefs that seem to logically corroborate this viewpoint.